Sigily! We're going to learn today about the A-stem, subjective and objective set of pronouns. These pronoun changes will be used with verbs that are commonly found throughout Unggohne or the Oneida language. So, swahalega, let's get started. So the target goals for the students to know are you should be aware of the A-stem, subjective, and objective pronouns. You should also be aware of the associated meanings of the pronouns for the A-stem, subjective, and objective. You should also be aware of the patterns within the subjective and objective and between both. Those are also really important. And the little Ojistogel is saying, "Oh, we're going to go down dao." He says, "Yes, I understand." So let's get started. So I also wanted to provide some background information about pronouns and stems and how stems are found and how they function within the Oneida language. So the first one, what is a pronoun? A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun. Examples in English are she, it, him, them, us, we. And all of our pronouns are prefixes, and that means that they are placed before the beginning of a word, or in our case, they are placed before the beginning of a verb root. Additionally, our language has an order of pronouns that follow a pattern that change depending on the stem. Each word in Oneida adheres to a specific stem, and stems include specific pronouns only unique to that stem. A lot of our stems do have repeated pronouns or pronouns that have similar patterns, but they're all just a little bit different. And so some of those that we'll work on first are the A stem. The C stem is also very common. The A and the C stem are the most common, but we also have 6 additional stems, so therefore there's 8 sets of stems total in the Oneida language. That includes the A, C, O, U. We have a fake E stem, an I stem, an E stem, as well as a caret stem. So we also need to know what we are talking about when we are working with our stem pronouns. And so we're going to work on this patterning system for the meanings, strictly just in English. The following chart will provide you with the meanings of any stem that includes both the subjective and objective sides of any stem. We will use the same chart for every single stem. Only the Oneida pronouns will change. So this is our meaning chart. It's going to apply to all stems. It will apply to both the subjective and objective sides of each stem. So our meanings are as follows. The first one is me, then you, him, her, and she or it, and that rounds up our first column. When we're talking about her, in this case, it's a younger female, and in this one, it's generally an older female. A lot of times, verbs, it can also be used to describe it. The second column, me and you two males. This can be a mixed group when you use it in Oneida, and you can also say them if you're talking about it in English. The next one is 2 females. It's important to know that 2 females, or anything that has to do with females in Oneida, and this applies to the third column also, is strictly female. So 2 females, and it's strictly females. The last one is me and one other person. We could also say it as me and somebody else. This is different than the top one up here. This is me and you. That's an inclusive statement. Down here, it's me and somebody else. That's an exclusive statement. The third column, all of us. The next one, all of you or you all. Either of those would be correct. The next one, 3 or more males. We know that could be a mixed group. The next one, 3 or more females. Always strictly females. And then the last one can be me and 2 or more other people. All right? So we also have some patterns that you've probably noticed in the last slide that have to do with our meaning chart. And so there's 2 ways that our meanings are related in our meaning chart. One of them is across in rows, and the second one is down in columns. And we've labeled and numbered our columns by numbers. So we'll start with the first one here. So if you notice, all of these meanings are one subject. That's why we labeled them with number 1. So they only have to do with one person. If you look in the next column, these are all 2 people. So every single meaning is including 2 subjects. And so that one is labeled number 2. And the third one is what we call 3 or more. So our third column has to do with any group of people that is 3 or more. We said that they are also related by row. across. And so that's important to know because the ways that they are related across in rows are found on the side. So the first one is inclusive. And so that means that if I'm speaking myself, I'm included in all of these groups of subjects. So me and you, all of us. So that would include everyone in the room. The next one is exclusive. So it's like I'm talking, but I'm saying you two, all of you. So you is included in all of these subjects. The third one has to do with males. That one's pretty easy. Singular male, 2 males, and 3 or more males. The last one, the fourth row is females. And so a singular female, her, a younger her, 2 females, and 3 or more females. And the last one kind of doesn't really follow a pattern, but she or it, and then we have me and one other person, and me and 2 or more other people. So those meanings, and I know I kind of wrote all over that, it's good to notice the patterns though. All of those meanings are going to apply to the A-stem subjective and the A-stem objective, and we'll have some practice at the end of this writing those out. So one of the things that I hear a lot is students or learners want to dive right into Oneida and learn all these commands and memorize them and memorize verbs and things like that. And those are all really good things. But it's also really important to know the pronouns and who we're talking about when we say different things in Oneida. And those pronouns indicate the subjects of who and what we're saying. And those pronouns come from each of our 8 stems. So why are stems important? Stems are important because they indicate who the word is referring to. So like for example, a really common one in Ongwahohne is sadi. It means like you sit, or you can even break it down a little bit more simpler than that, just to mean sit. But we need to know who we're talking about. Like what are we really saying? Well, it comes from a root word to sit, but also the za in that word means you. And so understanding the pronouns and the stems will help you be able to change that word, like I will sit, or you should sit, or I'm sitting, or something like that. So that's why stems are important, because those pronouns and the patterns within each stem really help us become aware of how the language functions and how words change, and really truly giving us a connection to verbs and words by understanding the most simplest components first. So our first one that we're going to look at is the A stem. We know that A stem root words will always begin with an A. That's why it's called the A stem. The majority of letters in the A stem, both subjective and objective pronouns, will end in an A. If you take Oneida a little bit farther down the line, one of the verbs we look at is udlanot, and udlanot is simply just a root, but we notice that the root starts with an A, and so we know that it's going to be the A stem because of the letter that it starts with. So that's kind of what the background of the A stem and how it functions is. So we did have a little example with sadi a couple slides before this one, but we know that stem pronouns, we know that those are prefixes, and so those are always going to be before the beginning of a word or a verb, and they are attached to the root word. We get a little bit more into that later on, but an example that we do work on is ungwehu. Ungwehu means to be Oneida, or like an original person, or an original human, describing like native people within our own language. And so this pronoun for me in the U stem is gu, so I could put that together and say gungwehu, means I'm Oneida. It's one way to say I'm Oneida, but we have our pronoun here, and we notice that that is before the root word, and so our pronouns are prefixes in the Oneida language. So let's go through the A stem subjective and objective pronouns, then we'll talk about the patterns, and we'll show them with our meanings as well, so you can become familiar with those. So we're first going to begin with the A stem. There is a subjective side to the A stem. There's also an objective side. Both of them are equally important because most verbs will change subjectively and objectively, but the first one we're going to do out of the 8 is the A stem. One other quick thing to note, if you're wondering, okay, stems have subjective and objective sides. Well, what is the difference between those two? They're kind of both present tenses. It just depends on the type of verb. But they are found within every single stem. So the A stem, C stem, O stem, U stem, and so on. But every stem has a subjective side and objective side. You don't really have to worry about this right now. Right now, I want you to focus on learning the pronouns and the patterns of the pronouns. But essentially, the subjective is generally habitual actions. We call that the serial. One way to remember that is by saying serial killer. And so characteristics of serial killers is that they do that all the time, and that is essentially what the subjective is, something that's happening all the time. The objective can represent things happening in the moment, generally for most verbs, but sometimes they can also represent like this recent past tense, as in I just got it, or I just obtained it, or something like that. So let's start with our A stem subjective pronouns. The first one sounds like ga, za, la, you, wa, dia, ja, ya, gia, yagya, dwa, swa, lu, gu, yagwa. Our A stem objective pronouns are as follows. The first one sounds like waga, za, lo, yago. It can either be yo or wa. We just put yo/wa. Yungya, ja, lona, yona, yungya, yungwa, swa, lona, yona, yungwa. Now on this page we have our meanings attached. So for the first one, if we go back to the subjective, our first one, ga, means me, za means you, la means him, you means her, like a younger her, wa can be she or it, generally an older she if it's used in that case. The second column, dia, is me and you, ja is you two, ya is two males, gia is two females, yagya is me and somebody else, or you could also say me and one other person, dwa is all of us, swa is you all or all of you, lu is three or more males, it could be a mixed group, gu is three or more females, it could also be a mixed group, and yagwa is me and two or more other people. We also have the meanings for our objective, and if you look at this page, the meanings are exactly the same, only the pronouns are different. So waga in this case is me, za is you, lo is him, yago is her, yo or wa can be she or it, yungya is me and you, ja is you two, lona is two males, yona is two females, yungya means somebody else, yungwa, all of us, swa, all of you, lona can be three or more males, yona is three or more females, and yungwa is me and two or more other people. I'm also going to go through these with the charts side by side. So we had ga, za, la, you, wa, dia, ja, ya, gia, yagya, dwa, swa, lu, gu, yagwa. That was the subjective. The objective, waga, za, lo, yago, yo or wa, yungya, ja, lona, yona, yungya, and the third column, yungwa, swa, lona, yona, yungwa. So generally when we go through them and we read through them or we practice in class or on your own, we start with the first one and go down, and then we go to the second one and go down, and then we go to the third one and go down. That's usually how we do it. So we just introduced the pronouns, the A stem subjective and the A stem objective. Now let's talk about some patterns within those, because we want to rely on the patterns and learning those stems through the patterns rather than just memorizing them, because we really want to make a connection with these pronouns, with our stems, and eventually with our words. So what patterns do you notice for the pronouns for the subjective and objective? There's a lot of them, and we're going to talk about those next. So we have our two charts for the A stem side by side. We have the subjective and the objective. So going back to our question, what patterns do you notice within the subjective, and what patterns do you notice within the objective? The next one, what patterns do you notice within each of these two charts? So I'll give you a minute or two, look at these charts, identify maybe some endings. That's a good way to start. Do they have any common endings in either of the charts? Are there pronouns that are repeated between the two charts? What do you see? So hopefully you found a couple patterns. There are a ton of them. Almost every single pronoun in almost every stem in Oneida has a pattern that it falls under. But let's talk about this first column here. So if you look to the side here, there are some patterns. And if you notice on the chart, the first letter of most of the patterns in this first column are a different color. That's because those are patterns that are going to be found frequently in a lot of other subjective sides of other stems. So generally when we make this statement, we're talking about subjective sides of all stems. And so a K something will always indicate me in the subjective, and that is a pattern for any stem. S's generally reference you in Oneida. L's generally reference males. And we're talking strictly about the first column here. And then this last one here, Y's generally reference females. So we know that that's a younger her. The second column has this YA ending. So that's important to be aware of, because all the pronouns in the second column end in a YA. And that will help us to familiarize ourselves with these pronouns dia, ja, ya, gia, and yagya. When we start at two males, it's just the ending, and then we add a K for two females, gia, and then this last one, it's like we're adding a YAK. And the last one, the third column has this WA ending, and so we actually see that in three of our pronouns here, dwa, swa, and yagwa. The entire column is dwa, swa, lugu, and yagwa, but the ending is found within three of those. And onto the patterns for the objective side. So there's going to be some similarities that we'll talk about between both of them in a second here, but let's just focus on the objective. For the first column, generally for any stem, a WAK something, and this something is generally the letter of the stem, will always indicate me in Oneida in that spot for that pronoun. S's generally reference you. That was the same for the subjective side. L's generally reference males, and Y's generally reference females. This is talking about the first column here. But be aware that they are different on the subjective and the objective side. The second column, we still have that YA ending, so that's important to remember when we're talking about patterns between both of them. Notice that the two males and the three or more males, they're exactly the same pronoun, lona and lona. Same thing for the females. Two females and three or more females is also yona and yona. Also, there's one other one. The top, yungya, and the bottom are exactly the same, okay? And we also have some similar patterns in the third column. Yungwa and yungwa are the same, has that WA ending for yungwa, swa, and yungwa, and we also said lona, lona, yona, yona are the same. Now let's talk about some patterns between both of them. So there's similarities and there's differences, and those are the patterns that I want you to use when you familiarize yourself with these pronouns for the subjective and the objective. So the first one, L's generally reference males. We know on the subjective side it is la versus lo on the objective. So the L's still apply because they're both saying him, but they are different. So that's important to know. Y's generally reference females, so that's true. Subjective is you, objective is yago. They are different, but they both start with a Y. They both mean her, a younger her, generally. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is notice how yagya in the subjective changes to yungya in the objective. They are very close, but they are not the same. In the subjective, it is always a YAK and the ending. In this case, it's YA. Well, that A in YAK changes to a U in the objective. So yagya changes to yungya in the objective, okay? Notice also how you two, you all stay the same on both sides. So if we look at the subjective and the objective, these pronouns for you two, you all are exactly the same, and that's important to know. Now, that pattern's actually not going to apply to every stem. That is a stem specific pattern. The other thing, and the last one that I wanted you to pay attention to is, notice how most of the pronouns end in an A, but not all of them do. So just be aware, generally, when we're talking about a stem, generally a lot of pronouns will end in an A, but not all of them. And the last one I just wanted to add was this yagwa. We said that yagya changes changes to yungya. Well, yagwa in the subjective third column will also do the same thing. That yak will change to a yuk, and we have yungwa. And also that yungwa and yungwa, the top and the bottom are the same. So when you're writing them out, if you can remember those patterns, that will help you to identify the pronouns of each stem. So let's take some practice to write out the meaning chart. And the meaning chart, remember, applies to the A-stem subjective and the A-stem objective. It's the same exact meaning for both sides, and these are just the meanings in English. So the first one is given, that's me. Now also don't forget that the first column only has to do with one person. Second column is two people, and the third is three or more. Also that each of the rows have something in common with each other, except that last row. But the first one is given, that's me. Our next one is going to be you, and I will probably abbreviate here. The third one, we know that that has to do with males, and so the meaning is going to be him. The fourth one has to do with females, so we say that that is her. Generally, we're saying a younger her. And this last one here is like an older female. We kind of describe that as an older she, or it could also mean it. It depends on the verb and how it's used. The second column has to do with two people, and don't forget we said that they are related across, so it's definitely going to have to do with me. So it's definitely going to be inclusive. So our meaning is me and you. The next one, this is exclusive, so it's just going to have to do with you two. So that's the meaning, you two. The next one we know is males. Two males, so I'm just going to write 2M, that stands for two males. Don't forget it could be a mixed group. The next one here, females, two females, so I'm going to write 2F. Don't forget though, always strictly females. This next one here is kind of different. I'm going to call it me and one other person. The third column, if we start at the top, remember they all have to do with something similar in that first row, so it's going to be all of us. So if I was speaking, I would say me and you, all of us. The next one, they are all going to be related here. It's an exclusive row, so you two, you all, or you could say all of you. Either one of those would be fine. Third row, him, two males, three or more males, so usually I write 3 plus is like 3 or more males. Could be a mixed group. Fourth row, has to do with females. So her, 2 females, or 3 or more females. Always strictly females when we're talking about that. And the last one, it's kind of different, but these two have similarities. It's like me and 2 or more other people. So hopefully you can read that. Now let's focus on just the subjective pronouns. So if you want, you can write out a chart, a blank chart, and follow along. I'll fill them in, and I'll try to help you out with some of the patterns that we have for our pronouns here. We know that S's reference you in Oneida, so this one's definitely going to start with an S. We know that L's reference males in Oneida, and we know that that meaning there is him, so it's going to start with an L. We know that Y's reference females, so this next one's going to start with female because that meaning is her. So if we started with the first one, we have ga, the next one is za, the next one is la, her is you, and this last one here is wa. So that's our first column. I'll label the columns also. Now if we go to the second column, remember they have the same exact ending in the second column, and that ending is YA. So if you want to go ahead and write out that ending for every single one, that's fine. It helps out when you're just learning. So if we start with our first one, our pronoun for me and you is dia, you two, ja. 2 males is actually just the ending here, which is ya. 2 females, gia, and me and one other person, the pronoun is yagya, so Y-A-K-Y-A. The third one, remember that there's 3 spots that have the same ending of wa, so if you want to write that ending in before we get started, that's fine. The first one for all of us is dwa. The next one, swa, which is you all or all of you. The next one, 3 or more males and 3 or more females, they kind of rhyme. That's what I always tell students when they're first learning. Don't forget that the pronouns lu and gu, they kind of go together. They rhyme, lu, gu. 3 males, 3 or more males, or 3 or more females. And this last one here is me and 2 or more other people, yagwa. So the same thing with our objective side. Our patterns, I'll give you the patterns first if you want to write a blank chart out. The first one has to start with an S here. L's reference males for the first column. And we know that Y's reference females also for the first column. That is a Y. Okay, don't forget about the endings for the second column and the third column. Now this is the objective, so there's going to be similarities but also differences. So this next one here after waga, the next one for you is za, him is lo, her is yago. That is a K, sorry. And the last one in the first column, it is always generally going to be yo, or whatever the subjective pronoun in that spot was. And the subjective pronoun in that spot was wa, so yo or wa. Now, the top one here, sometimes I tell students to start down here because if you did the subjective side, you knew that the pronoun in that spot was yagya. We know that yagya, that A in yak is going to change to a U. So it's actually going to be yungya. And I tell students to start down here because we know that the pattern for me and you and me and one other person, the pronoun's exactly the same in the objective. So if you have the bottom one here, you can definitely do the top one and just add it in. It's kind of like a no-brainer. So we have yungya. We also knew that in the A-stem subjective that this entire row was exactly the same. So if you want to go ahead and fill that in, you can go ahead and do that. We know that U2 is ja, and that's T-S-Y-A. And this last one, you all, is swa. Sorry, S-W-A. So we're left with a few here, but they're all based on patterns, so we should be able to get them. Now, 2 males and 3 or more males, and 2 females and 3 or more females, those have pronouns that kind of sound alike, they rhyme, they go together, and they also are repeated in the second and third column. So second column pronoun is lona, which is exactly the same in the third column for 3 or more males. And lona and yona go together. So 2 females is yona, and it's the same for the third column. Now we just have these last 2 left. We know that based on our pattern, those 2 are going to be exactly the same. Well, we did the subjective already, and in the subjective, our pronoun was yagwa. We know that based on our patterns, this A in yak always changes to a U in the objective. And so we're doing the objective. So our pronoun for this spot is going to be yungwa. Based on our patterns, we know it's the same on the top here. And so the pronoun for all of us is also yungwa. So hopefully you can read that. I'll try to do my best handwriting. But that's our patterns for the A-stem subjective and objective. Now let's do both of them back to back. So I usually encourage my students to write out when they're first learning the charts out every single day. So if you want to just use a scratch paper or whatever, a Post-it note, they have drawing apps on your phone you can use. Anything really works. Whatever best works for you, just use some blank charts. So when I initially teach students, I'll give them the first one. It kind of helps them get started, but eventually I take all of that away and I'll say, tell me all of them for the subjective and objective, and then I'll take all the tables away, and then I just want them to do it orally, or maybe I'll throw a meaning out there or a pronoun and I'll have them give me the opposite so that students understand all this chart, the chart for the subjective and the objective, backwards, forwards, ups, down, side to side, meanings in English, pronouns in Oneida, every which way. That is how we familiarize ourselves with the language, and that's how we acquire it, because above all, we want to save our language and we want to create speakers, and so that's kind of the goal of what we do here. And it all goes down to even these simplest components. So the first one on the subjective side is ga. The next one, remember, S is reference you, za, him, la, her is you, she or it is wa. Second column, common ending, don't forget, ya. So this first one here, dia. Next one, you too, ja. 2 males, it's actually just the ending, ya. 2 females, gia. And the last one, me and somebody else, yagya. So they all have this ya in the pronoun. That's important. Third column, we know that the first one is dwa, wa for all of us, all of you, and me and 2 or more other people. The next one is going to be swa. These next 2 kind of rhyme for 3 or more males and 3 or more females, lu and gu. And then the last one has to have that ending wa, so we end up with yagwa. So we have ga, za, la, yu, wa, dia, ja, ya, gia, yagya, dwa, swa, lu, gu, yagwa. So it's important to know all of those. Even if I gave you just one of them and I said, hey, what's the meaning of lu in the A stem subjective? Tell me the meaning without going through all the charts. But it's important to go through all of them initially and then practice beyond that. In the objective, we know the first one is waga, that's me. The next one is za, him is lo, her is yago. She or it is yo, or whatever the pronoun is in the subjective, and so it's yo or wa. Second column, yungya. For me and you two, same as the subjective side. The pronoun is ja. 2 males, lona. 2 females, yona. The last one's the same as the top. Me and one other person, yungya. Sorry, it's going over into the third a little bit, the third column. But let's do the third column. The top of the third, all of us. Pronoun is yungwa. The next one's the same as the subjective side. Pronoun is swa. We know these 2 are the same. Lona and yona are repeated for 3 or more males and 3 or more females. And the last one is actually the same as the top, so we shouldn't have to use our brains too much. But the meaning is me and 2 or more other people, the pronoun yungwa. So if you have a scratch piece of paper out, you can go ahead and do the next 2. So hopefully we gave you enough practice. This is eventually what I want you to work up to. Try working on the subjective by itself, then the objective, and then work on both of them side by side. If you want to, write down the first one from the book on the subjective, and then the objective. You can go from there using the patterns. But then eventually I want you to be able to do the subjective and the objective without being given any of the pronouns or any prompts. And eventually I want you to be able to just orally go through both the subjective and the objective, and then beyond that be able to tell me whatever pronoun is here or whatever pronoun is here on the subjective or objective side, whichever one I choose randomly, so it just shows the teacher that you know the pronouns inside and out, backwards and forwards, up and down, every which way. That's kind of the point. And also the meaning, so don't forget about those as well. But if you want to go through and write out your charts, that will definitely help you. Also, another important tool to use if you don't have an iPad or phone or scratch paper, whiteboards. Whiteboards really help with writing out the charts. Kids or students really like to use those too. For some reason, it's the whiteboard markers they really like. But it's just another tool to help you to assist in your learning.